The cursed disappearance of the Sodder children, a case that makes no sense. What if I told you 5 children vanished without a trace, and the evidence makes no sense? On Christmas Eve, 1945, in the quiet town of Fayetteville, West Virginia, a fire broke out in the Sodder family home. Parents George and Jenny Sodder, along with 4 of their children, managed to escape the flames. But 5 of their children, Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, and Betty, were never seen again. The fire should have left behind evidence, charred remains, bones, something to indicate the children had perished inside. Yet, when the fire was extinguished, there was nothing. Not a single trace of their bodies. As the years passed, the case only became more bizarre. Strange phone calls, mysterious sightings, anonymous letters, and even a chilling photograph decades later, all deepened the mystery. Were the Sodder children truly lost to the fire, or were they stolen away in the dead of night? Tonight, we are diving deep into this confounding case. Before we get into the events of Christmas Eve, we need to understand who the Sodders were, particularly the father, George Sodder. George Sodder was born Giorgio Soddu in Tula, Sardinia, Italy, in 1895. At just 13 years old, he immigrated to the United States, arriving through Ellis Island. He eventually settled in West Virginia, where he built a life for himself. Hard-working and determined, George became a successful businessman, running a trucking company that transported coal and other goods. His wife, Jenny Cipriani, was also an Italian immigrant. Together, they raised 10 children in a 2-story wood frame house outside Fayetteville. The Sodders were a respected family in their community. They lived comfortably, and their home was always filled with the laughter of their children. But George's past was not without controversy. George Sodder's enemies. George was outspoken in his political beliefs. He was a staunch opponent of Benito Mussolini, the Italian dictator. In the heavily Italian-American community of Fayetteville, this stance made him enemies. Many Italian immigrants in the area were still loyal to Mussolini, even after his downfall and execution in April 1945. George openly criticized Mussolini, his policies, and anyone who supported him. Some believe this political stance played a role in what happened to his family that fateful night. There were warning signs, strange visitors, veiled threats, and ominous messages, all of which George ignored at the time. But in hindsight, they may have been clues that something sinister was in the works. In the weeks before the fire, a series of eerie events took place. 1. The unwanted visitor. A few months before Christmas, a man appeared at the Sodder home, offering to sell George life insurance. When George declined, the man became angry and reportedly said, "Your house is going up in smoke, and your children are going to be destroyed. You'll be paid for the dirty remarks you've been making about Mussolini." George dismissed the threat at the time. He had been arguing with local Italian-American businessmen over Mussolini's legacy for years. He thought this was just another heated exchange. But the threats didn't stop there. 2. The strange repairman. Around the same time, another man arrived at the house. He claimed to be inspecting power lines and warned the Sodders that their fuse box would cause a fire someday. This was strange because the power company had recently inspected their wiring and found it to be in perfect condition. Even more bizarrely, George later discovered that this man was not an employee of the power company. 3. A suspicious car parked near the house. In the days leading up to Christmas, the Sodder children noticed a strange car parked along Highway 21, just outside their home. The occupants of the car seemed to be watching the younger Sodder children as they played outside. Once again, George's family dismissed this as an isolated event. But these warnings would soon take on a terrifying new significance. Chapter 3. Christmas Eve, 1945, the night of the fire. The night started like any other Christmas Eve. The Sodder children were excited about presents and celebrations. Jenny Sodder allowed the 5 younger children to stay up past their usual bedtime to play with the new toys their older sister, Marion, had bought them. Around 10 p.m., Jenny told the children it was time for bed. 2 of the older Sodder boys, John and George Jr., had already gone to sleep after spending the day working on the family's trucks. The strange phone call. At around 12:30 a.m., Jenny answered the phone. On the other end was a woman's voice, someone she didn't recognize. The woman asked for a person Jenny had never heard of. In the background, Jenny could hear strange laughter, clinking glasses, and the sound of a party. Jenny told the woman she had the wrong number and hung up. But as she placed the receiver back down, she noticed something strange. The lights were still on downstairs, and the front door was unlocked, something very unusual for the Sodder household. Assuming the children had simply forgotten, she turned off the lights, locked the door, and returned to bed. The fire breaks out. At 1 a.m., Jenny was woken again, this time by a loud bang on the roof, followed by a rolling sound. Moments later, smoke began to fill the house. She woke George and the children, screaming that the house was on fire. The flames spread rapidly, consuming the staircase, making it impossible for Jenny and George to reach the 5 younger children's bedrooms upstairs. They called out their names, Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, and Betty, but there was no response. Desperate, George tried to reach them. He ran outside, determined to climb into the upper windows. That's when things got even stranger. The mysterious failures. George ran to grab his ladder, which he always kept propped against the side of the house. But it was missing. It was later found tossed down an embankment, more than 70 feet away. Thinking quickly, he ran to his trucks, intending to drive one close to the house and climb onto the roof. But inexplicably, neither of his trucks would start, even though they had been working perfectly fine earlier that day. Jenny tried calling the fire department, but her phone wasn't working. Marion ran to a neighbor's house to call for help, but the operator didn't answer. Another neighbor tried calling, and still, no response. Finally, a frustrated neighbor drove into town and physically found Fire Chief F.J. Morris. But even then, the response was slow. The Fayetteville Fire Department did not arrive until 8 a.m., 7 hours after the fire started. By then, the Sodder home had been reduced to ash. Jenny and George were devastated. Their 5 children were gone. Or so they thought. But as the ashes cooled, something became clear. There were no bodies. Not a single trace of Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, or Betty was found. The fire department searched the ruins for hours, yet they found no bones, no human remains, nothing. It was as if the children had vanished into thin air. Chapter 4: The Missing Remains and Immediate Investigation. When the fire was finally extinguished, the Sodders expected to find some trace of their children in the ruins. After all, even in the most intense house fires, bones and other remains are typically left behind. But to their horror, there was nothing. No skulls. No femurs. Not even fragments of teeth. This was immediately suspicious. The fire chief's bizarre explanation. Fire Chief F.J. Morris suggested that the fire had burned so hot that it completely incinerated the children's bodies. But Jenny Sodder refused to believe this. She spent the following weeks researching house fires and discovered that human bones remain even after extreme blazes. Crematoriums burn bodies at 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit for 2 hours, and yet, even under those conditions, bones still remain. The Sodder house fire had only lasted about 45 minutes before the home collapsed into itself. It was nowhere near hot enough to completely vaporize 5 human bodies. The explanation simply didn't add up. To test her theory, Jenny conducted her own experiments. She burned animal bones, chicken bones, and even large beef bones in a fire of similar intensity. Every single time, bones remained. This raised disturbing questions. If the children had died in the fire, where were their bones? Why did the fire leave behind household appliances, but not human remains? If the fire was hot enough to completely destroy bones, why was part of the house's basement still intact? None of it made sense. A curious discovery in the ashes. A few days after the fire, a local official claimed to have found bone fragments and internal organs in the debris. But instead of sending them for analysis, he buried them on the property. Years later, when a private investigator ordered an exhumation, the so-called organ turned out to be a piece of beef liver, which had never been burned at all. It seemed someone had planted it in the ashes to support the claim that the children had died in the fire. But why? The behavior of the Fayetteville Fire Department was deeply suspicious from the very beginning. 1. A delayed response. The Sodders were desperate for help, but the fire department took an astonishing 7 hours to arrive. Fayetteville was a small town, and the fire station was only 2 miles away from the Sodder home. Why did it take them until 8 a.m. to respond to a fire that started at 1 a.m.? Some have suggested the department was understaffed due to Christmas. Others claim they operated on a phone tree system, where one firefighter had to call another, who then had to call another, which slowed things down. But even considering this, a 7-hour delay was outrageous. And then, there was Chief Morris' behavior. 2. Chief Morris' suspicious actions. He refused to allow a proper search of the ruins for days. He insisted the children's bodies had been completely incinerated, despite evidence to the contrary. He later admitted to finding remains, but never reported it properly. The Sodders began to suspect a cover-up. Something wasn't right. In the weeks following the fire, witnesses began coming forward with chilling accounts. The children were seen alive after the fire. 1. A woman at a rest stop between Fayetteville and Charleston claimed she saw the missing Sodder children in a car with strange men the morning after the fire. 2. A waitress in a diner 50 miles away swore she served breakfast to 5 children matching their description. 3. A hotel worker in Charleston reported seeing the children with 2 Italian-looking men and women. The children appeared frightened and refused to speak. These accounts suggested one terrifying possibility. The Sodder children may have been kidnapped. But who would do such a thing? And why? Desperate for answers, the Sodders hired a private investigator named C.C. Tinsley. Tinsley quickly discovered that the case was even stranger than they had imagined. 1. Shocking discoveries. He learned about Chief Morris' cover-up, including the fake heart and bones that had been planted in the rubble. He discovered that the life insurance salesman who threatened George was part of the coroner's jury that ruled the fire an accident. But then, something even stranger happened. 2. Tinsley mysteriously disappears. Tinsley was making progress in the case. But before he could reveal all his findings, he vanished without a trace. His sudden disappearance fueled fears that someone was deliberately covering up the truth. Someone didn't want the Sodders to find their children. Chapter 8. The FBI's involvement and withdrawal. Frustrated with the lack of progress, the Sodders turned to the FBI. In 1947, George and Jenny personally wrote to J. Edgar Hoover, pleading for the FBI's help in solving the case. To their surprise, Hoover himself responded. He wrote back, saying, "Although I would like to be of service, the matter appears to be of local character and does not come within the investigative jurisdiction of this bureau." However, he added that if the local authorities requested the FBI's assistance, they would investigate. But the Fayetteville Police Department refused. This raised a troubling question. If the fire was just an accident, why did the police reject the FBI's help? Something was being hidden. In 1967, 22 years after the fire, Jenny Sodder received an envelope in the mail. It contained a grainy black and white photograph of a young man. On the back of the photo, a chilling message was written. Louis Sodder. I love brother Frankie. Ill boys. A. 9, 0, 1, 32 or 35. The Sodders were stunned. The man in the photograph bore a striking resemblance to their missing son, Louis. George and Jenny immediately hired another private investigator to track down the sender. But once again, the investigator disappeared. The family never heard from him again. This was the final straw. The Sodders became convinced that their children had been taken and that someone was determined to keep the truth hidden. Chapter 10. The Theories, What Really Happened to the Sodder Children? The disappearance of the Sodder children remains one of the most baffling mysteries in American history. Over the decades, multiple theories have emerged, some more plausible than others. Here, we will explore each of them in detail, analyzing the evidence for and against them. Theory 1. The Sodder children died in the fire. This is the official explanation given by authorities. According to this theory, the children were trapped inside the burning house and perished in the fire, leaving behind no remains. Arguments supporting this theory. 1. The fire was intense and spread rapidly, consuming the entire house within 45 minutes. 2. Fire Chief Morris insisted that the bodies had been completely incinerated, explaining the lack of remains. 3. The children were last seen in the home before the fire started, and there was no definitive proof that they were alive afterward. Problems with this theory. 1. Human bones do not burn completely in house fires. Even cremation, which takes place at 2000 degrees Fahrenheit for 2 hours, leaves behind bone fragments. The Sodder house fire lasted less than an hour. 2. No remains were ever found, even in the parts of the house that didn't burn as intensely. 3. Household appliances were still recognizable in the debris, yet 5 human bodies supposedly vanished without a trace. 4. Jenny Sodder's personal experiments with fire showed that bones should have remained. Verdict: the evidence strongly contradicts this theory. The idea that all 5 children were completely incinerated is not scientifically plausible. Theory 2. The Sodder children were kidnapped by the Italian Mafia. George Sodder was a vocal critic of Benito Mussolini, the fascist dictator of Italy. He was known for his anti-fascist views and often got into heated arguments with other Italian immigrants in Fayetteville. Arguments supporting this theory. 1. A life insurance salesman threatened George months before the fire, warning that his house would burn and his children would be destroyed if he didn't stop speaking against Mussolini. 2. Mysterious figures were seen watching the Sodder children in the days leading up to the fire. 3. The Sodder children were allegedly seen alive after the fire in multiple locations, including Charleston and a diner 50 miles away. 4. The anonymous photograph of Louis Sodder in 1967 suggested that at least one of the children had been taken and raised elsewhere. Problems with this theory. 1. If the Mafia kidnapped the children, why did they leave George and Jenny alive? Typically, Mafia-style retribution would involve the entire family. 2. The message on the 1967 photo was cryptic and could not be definitively linked to the case. 3. If the Mafia had taken the children, why were no ransom demands ever made? Verdict: this theory is plausible but lacks direct evidence. However, the threats against George suggest someone may have had a motive to target his family. Some theorists have suggested that someone in the Sodder's inner circle played a role in the disappearance. Suspicious individuals. Fire Chief Morris. He later admitted to planting a fake organ in the ashes to support the claim that the children had died. Was he covering up a crime? The local police, they refused the FBI's help, raising questions about whether they were complicit. The life insurance salesman. Did he have connections that could have arranged for the kidnapping? Arguments supporting this theory. 1. The authorities' behavior was incredibly suspicious. The delayed fire response and refusal to allow FBI involvement suggest a cover-up. 2. Someone planted fake remains in the fire site, which means at least one person was actively hiding something. 3. 2 separate private investigators disappeared while looking into the case. Problems with this theory. 1. There is no direct evidence linking a specific individual to the crime. 2. If there was a cover-up, it would have required multiple people to stay silent for decades. Verdict: this theory raises serious questions but lacks definitive proof. Each of these theories has compelling aspects, but based on the available evidence, the most plausible scenario is 1. The fire was intentionally set to cover up the kidnapping of the Sodder children. 2. The children were seen alive after the fire, suggesting they were abducted rather than killed. 3. The authorities' refusal to investigate and the cover-up efforts indicate a conspiracy. 4. The threats against George Sodder suggest a possible motive. While we may never know the full truth, the evidence suggests that the Sodder children did not die in the fire that night. Someone took them. George and Jenny Sodder spent the rest of their lives searching for their children. They never rebuilt their home. Instead, they turned the site into a memorial. Jenny wore black mourning clothes for the rest of her life. Despite their efforts, the mystery was never solved. The case remains one of the most disturbing disappearances in American history. Even today, the question lingers. What really happened to the Sodder children? If you believe there are clues yet to be uncovered, or if you have theories and insights that could shed new light on this mystery, we need to hear from you. Share your thoughts and any information you might have in the comments below. Your input could help crack one of America's darkest enigmas. And if you're fascinated by mysteries that defy explanation, be sure to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a deep dive into history's most unsettling cases. This is The Strange and the Sinister, where the truth is always stranger than fiction.